Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Doyle, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode. So today is part 2 with the incredible Amanda Barnes, a leading expert in South American wine. And if you've listened to part 1, which I hope you have, you will know she was recently announced as one of the 4 new Masters of Wine, which is just a massive achievement. But before we dive into today's South American themed episode, I just wanted to quickly share some exciting news. I have been nominated for the Wine Travel Awards in the Wine and Food Influencer category, specifically for expert opinion. Honestly, it's really exciting and lovely to be recognised for just sharing my passion for wine. And so here's where I'd really love your support. Voting is super simple. It literally takes 1 second. So you just go to winetravelawards.com/nominee/Yanina-Doyle/ however much easier. The link is in the show notes. Once you're on the website, you're going to find the button to the right at the top that says vote. Give it a click and boom, done. And in case you've never heard of the Wine Travel Awards, they celebrate the best in wine tourism, spotlighting people and places who are helping to make the wine world more exciting, educational, and inclusive. So a little vote from you would mean the world. Now back to today's episode. We're diving deep into Criolla grape varieties, what they are and which ones you need to try. Extreme vineyards and regions of South America. We are going to be talking high altitudes, coastal, super far south vineyards, heritage winemaking techniques, those ancient methods that are still being used today, and the most breathtaking vineyards you simply have to visit to kickstart your South American wine adventures. Oh, and just a quick reminder, there's also a link in my show notes to winemakers.tv. If you're as obsessed with wine as I am, this is a premium streaming platform with over 127 episodes about iconic wine regions and wine masterclasses. And by using my special affiliate link, not only do you get to geek out even more about wine, but you also help support this podcast. So win-win. Now grab yourself a glass of Torrontés or maybe a Pais. Get comfy and let's dive into the wild and wonderful world of South American wine. Enjoy. So I was very well behaved by not allowing you to put any hints of what your research paper was when we were chatting in part 1 for your Master of Wine. But I was so excited to read that you investigated, wrote all about the Criolla varieties. I've actually done an episode on the Criolla varieties. I've just talked a little bit about Torrontés, about Pais, or obviously you can call it, depending on where it's grown, differently, and Moscatel de Alejandría. They're the 3 major ones I focused on. Everyone, if you want to know more detail, I'll put that in the show notes. But there's loads. How many varieties have they identified in South America right now? And what is, to you, a Criolla variety?
So there's over 120 identified now between Chile and Argentina and Peru and Bolivia. You know, new varieties are being identified all the time. It takes time to publish research. It takes time to share research. But both INIA in Chile and INTA in Argentina are doing really significant research into genetic identification of the Criolla varieties. So Criolla, in a nutshell, is the name that we give the family of grape varieties that originated from the first Vitis vinifera vines that were brought to the Americas in the late 1400s and the early 1500s. So predominantly that, family comes from 2 main varieties, Moscatel de Alejandría, or Muscat of Alexandria, and Listan Prieto, which we call Pais in Chile and Criolla Chica in Argentina, and there's various other names around the continent, Mission Grape in California, or the US, for example. From those 2 varieties and a couple other of those early founding varieties, we have a whole family of native South American Criolla varieties. There's a little bit of argument as to whether we should be calling Listan Prieto Criolla variety and Moscatella Criolla variety, or whether we should, only call the grape varieties that are born here as Criolla varieties. But I think the overall kind of more accepted term is that we will consider them all Criolla varieties, because truthfully, Muscat's planted everywhere, but Listan Prieto, there's only a handful of hectares left in Europe. So it really is a very South American grape today. And also these grape varieties have obviously evolved quite a lot here through the 500 years that they've been planted and selected and replanted. So yeah, that's the Criolla family. And there's at least 120 of them identified at the moment. But I think within 5 years, I think we'll have at least 170.
I'm excited to talk about this a little bit more because I was in La Palma, so one of the Canary Islands recently, and I got to taste. I was tasting lots of the Listan whatevers. There's a Listan Blanco, Listan Negro, Listan Prieto, but Listan Prieto, as you just mentioned, is the exact grape variety that came across to South America and is known as Pais or Mission or Criolla Chica. And I got to taste one of their old vine, Listan Prieto from La Palma. It was from a winery called Vega Norte. So they're the biggest, they're kind of a cooperative and they're like the biggest on the island. And it was a bottle for 30 euros. It literally is not on their website. I went into their shop and they had the one bottle and she was like, that's all we have left. So I don't know how limited it was. She just said there was very few left. And we drank it. And that was just one of the joys as well of traveling to these wine regions, that you may go to a winery and try something that you kind of almost no one else is going to try. And it was just the minerality and the purity and the freshness and the elegance, but also the power. There was quite a lot of alcohol in it. And I adored it. And it was, as you know, I've worked for a Chilean winery for many years and I've been able to taste lots of Pais specifically from Chile. And I've always really liked it. And 10, 15 pounds a bottle and you're good to go. Really nice, maybe a little rustic, but delicious. And so it was so amazing to taste almost like the history. So was there a specific wine or two within this Criolla world, these varieties, that kind of really took you on your journey with them?
No, I wouldn't say there was a specific wine, but my fascination for Criolla really started many years ago when I was in Chile, actually, visiting the old vines in Maule and Etata and Biobío, and just kind of being so impressed by these 200-year-old vines that are, even the 60-year-old vines are incredible to see, but when they're like 100, 150, 200 years old, they're really kind of jaw-dropping. And just wanting to understand more why these varieties, have existed, have survived as these beautiful old vines, and why I didn't know about them, why you didn't learn about them like in the WSET, and, you'd rarely see them on the bottle. And, I just wanted to understand why they were being kind of overlooked and ignored, and why there wasn't this focus on them when clearly the vineyards are there and the vines were beautiful, and several growers really believed in them, and a handful of those kind of pioneering bigger winemakers also really believed in them. But it's been still is a real push for them for these grape varieties to get the recognition that they potentially deserve. So it was really the story that interested me more than a particular bottle of wine. And it's the story that continues to interest me because, it's a story that involves like hundreds of thousands of people between kind of growers in the 4 countries where we have these Criolla varieties, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. These are varieties that have been the kind of fabric of South America's wine industry and North America's, in fact. And, it's really thanks to these that we have a wine industry today. And they've just kind of been put in a corner and ignored, in the same way that almost every country in the world, focuses on the kind of more commercially appealing international, normally Bordeaux varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon or Sauvignon Blanc. It's always fascinated me. And the wines have definitely, become something really engaging and wonderful to taste. And there's always been the odd kind of like rough gem in the pack. But now I would say that at least 60-70% of the Criolla wines that I taste are really very delicious. They're something that I'd want to continue drinking. there is, a good 40% that are coming from, producers who just don't have enough experience with either winemaking or with the varieties. There are some big wineries that are experimenting with the Criollas, and they can make the most boring wines out of them. They might have all the winemaking experience in the world, but if you don't have the experience of vinifying these varieties, doesn't mean you're going to make a great wine, because they do need to be vinified quite differently to Malbec and to Cabernet Sauvignon. So, there's definitely a learning process happening at every scale, from those artisanal producers right to the kind of big guns that are making their first, red Criollas in particular. But it's really exciting. And there are some really beautiful, very distinctive, very particular wines coming through. And I think that's what makes it really interesting for me as a wine lover, is tasting these wines, because they have a lot of personality, and I love them. I think you're drinking a piece of history, and these are such kind of sustainable vineyards. Typically, they're the kind of future to climate change. There's so many positive things about the Criolla varieties, and it's great to see so many winemakers now actually taking the time to champion them and put some energy into them. But we're still losing them at a rapid pace, which is why I dedicated my thesis to it, because it is still a battle, an upward battle to keep these old vines in the ground and to create something that has like a commercial relevance and opportunity for growers, for families, for producers to be able to continue with cultivating these, rather than just ripping them out and planting avocado or cherries, which is what's happening.
Ah, okay. So for the varieties that are doing well, the ones that are still around, you said that many are very distinctive. So in your mind, what do you think are the most distinctive Criolla varieties out there?
Well, the ones that you've mentioned obviously are the kind of, the most planted. So we have País in Chile, Criolla Chica in Argentina, also grown in Bolivia and Peru. And I think that is the grape variety, the red grape variety, which certainly shows the most kind of quality potential in terms of, it's got this lovely kind of tannic presence. If you manage it well, they're quite fine tannins. If you give it a bit more maceration, they can be quite punchy. But, I think producers a lot more experience with País now. So we really kind of start to see some very fine expressions of it. It's much more structured in Chile typically than it is here in Argentina. So there is quite significant differences.
Okay, interesting, because my experience with Criolla Chica, so the País version in Argentina, actually is very pathetic. Like, I may have tasted one or two.
There's only 300 hectares here. So there's a very small production of Criolla Chica in Argentina, where we've got 10,000 hectares in Chile. I think we'll have a lot less than 10,000 today, unfortunately. But the records will catch up at some stage when they get published. But anyway, so there's a lot less. It is, the stronghold is in Chile, and then we have, maybe a couple hundred hectares between Peru and Bolivia as well. But people are reinvesting in Criolla Chica here in Argentina. There are new vineyards of Criolla Chica. So it's already being kind of recognized as a grape variety of high quality. And it's the one that everyone's really quite excited to work with. But it's difficult to find pure plantings in Argentina, whereas in Chile, we have a lot of pure plantings in place.
And I would also say, presumably, from knowing about the País in Maule, Itata, Biobío, down in the south of Chile, there's a lot of old vines. So like you said, anything from 50 years old up to 200, 250, whereas now they're doing new plantings in Argentina. So presumably also maybe that could be another reason why you find the softer versions in Argentina, do you think?
No, you wouldn't have tasted anything from the new vines yet, because it's very new. We're talking in the last 3 years. So there's definitely nothing that would have come to market yet. It's the difference of climate. So, you're looking at southern Chile, granitic soils, and that kind of, it's the terroir. I think País, Criolla Chica, Listán Prieto is a terroir expressive grape. And we do see, in northern Argentina, the Calchaquí, the Criolla Chica there does have a lot more structure and presence than the Criolla Chica of Mendoza, because it's a hotter, sunnier climate with, more extremes of temperature. So you always get a bit more structure as well. So I think it really is a very kind of terroir expressive grape, which also makes it very exciting. But then the majority of the plantations of Criolla that we have in Argentina are Cereza, which probably doesn't have the same quality, definitely doesn't have the same quality potential, and Criolla Grande, which doesn't have the same quality potential as Criolla Chica, but I think Criolla Grande, there is some quality potential there for lighter, juicy red wines. And you can have that with some Cereza or without. The Cereza is like the lightest for sure of the kind of red Criollas. So we'll see what happens. There's definitely some Criolla Grandes, which I really enjoy drinking here. And I think we've got so many hectares of Criolla Grande that there's a good opportunity to do a lot more. And, they can make lovely kind of deeper rosé, lighter red styles. So hopefully we'll see that. But in terms of your original question of quality potential, Torontes for sure. We've got the 3 Torontes varieties. So Torontes Riojana, which is the most planted, the best loved, the best known. It's the one that most people will be tasting with their very aromatic styles of Torontes. But then one that I'm particularly excited about is Torontes San Juanino, which is a much more kind of savory style of Torontes and a little bit more textural normally, and can be a bit more phenolic, but it depends how you make it. But I find that you get some really nice kind of more earthy, savory styles, and it really suits very nicely a bit of skin contact. And I'm quite excited to see where that goes, because you've got some beautiful old vines of San Juanino. The Mendocino, for now, I haven't tasted anything that's exciting, but there's plenty of plants, so we'll see what happens. And then the other of high quality is definitely Moscatel de Alejandría. And I think in particular in Chile, you get some really beautiful quality Moscatels. Again, a great variety that works really nicely for orange wine and skin contact, and can make some really beautiful expressions in different parts of South America. I love the Moscatels from Bolivia as well, for example. They're some of my favorites. And then the other variety that we have a lot of in Argentina, and there are some exciting wines coming from, is Pedro Jimenez. It's a very neutral grape variety, really, but it has quite high acidity. And I think you can make some very nice kind of wines when you play a little bit with winemaking. So maybe with an element of floor or a bit of skin contact or maybe a bit of oxidation. And it can just make a very smart kind of clean, crisp wine as well. So we'll see. There's a lot to kind of, there's a lot to play with. Maticha, there's some lovely matiches coming through as well. There's a lot to play with. There's lots of...
Matiche. This is new. Matiche.
Yeah, that's one of the lesser... There's over 100 varieties, and at least 20 of them in some kind of level of commercial production. But in the UK market, País, you'll often get bottled as just Criolla from Argentina, and also your Criolla from Argentina might be Criolla Grande. So it could be a mixture, or it could be a single variety of each. Torontes, which will be bottled as Torontes, but you've got at least 2 different varieties that you can be tasting. And then Moscatel de Alejandría. And Pedro Jimenez, there are definitely some that are starting to come into the UK. So Mariana Onofre has a nice one, and La Cayetana, which is probably my favourite Pedro Jimenez out there.
Okay, there we go. Everyone make a note. Now, I want to come back to Torontes, because Torontes actually, I think, is a little bit more, of all of the grape varieties, a little bit more well known, just for the fact that, it's very aromatic, lovely and floral, and people tend to actually get on quite well with it if it's well made and it has enough acidity, because obviously that, I think, is sometimes the slight issue. But you mentioned the 3 different types, and I'd love for you to clarify. As far as I know, these are all natural crossings that all came from País with Moscatel de Alejandría, but at different times.
Not quite.
That's what I was going to say, because when you do a bit more research, it seems like there's a lot of probably, possibly.
Yeah, so mistakenly, they've just been called Torontes for a long time. They are 3 different grape varieties. They're totally different. We know that they're part of the Criolla family, so they're related in the sense that they're part from this same family here that I described at the beginning. But they're 3 genetically different grape varieties. Torontes San Juanino and Torontes Riojano do come from, a large, part of the Criolla grape varieties, do come from a crossing of Moscatel de Alejandría and Listan Prieto. But Torontes Mendocino, we still have a parent that we don't know. So we know it comes from the Moscatel, I believe. I should double check that actually, that it's a daughter of the Moscatel rather than Listan Prieto, but we don't know the other parent. So the parentage is not yet known.
But again, like you said, Cereza, that grape variety, that again is another natural crossing of, I should say, Listan Prieto rather than using it, isn't it, with Moscatel de Alejandría. So it's over time, these vineyards have been planted with the 2 grape varieties, and they've crossed to create their own genetic different varieties. Is that the understanding of so many of these Criolla varieties?
Yeah, so the majority of these Criolla varieties come from a crossing of these 2. I mean, you could cross 2 grape varieties a billion times and you'll come up with a billion different results. It's not like the same with people having a child. Your parents, you might have a sister and a brother, but they're totally different to you. So it's the same with grapevines. You can cross, and some of these crossings would have happened naturally, as in not controlled, so happened in the vineyard by nature, and others would have been intentionally crossed by viticulturists. So they believe that the Jesuits actually did a fair amount of crossing themselves, which wasn't originally known. So that's, something that's kind of come out newly in research, is that actually, it looks like there was a lot more intelligence behind this Criolla family than just like it accidentally happened, which I hope is something that, that's the whole kind of part of the reason as well for my thesis, is to be able to communicate this so that people realize that it's not just, these aren't just, wild grapevines. There were people behind them who cultivated them and grew them intentionally because they were giving them wines of quality. But yeah, so we have multiple varieties that come from a crossing of these two, which is very normal in the vine world.
Well, I think that is actually still really, really important to highlight, because it was actually the Criolla varieties, when I was learning about them, that I had a moment when I went, oh, I always figured if you cross two grape varieties that was basically going to be more or less the same. The thought that just by crossing them and then actually happen to be red, and then the next time you cross it and it happens to be white, and then you cross it, so it is really, really important for people to know that you can cross the same two, the father vine being this place, mother there, and it will still be different every single time.
It's very much like thinking of, I find it easier to simplify it and think of it as people. It's like your parents would have a different child each time. And the only way that you're going to get the same Janina is to clone yourself, literally take a clone of yourself, which is what you do with grapevines. You take a cutting of that grape, that same grapevine, and you plant it elsewhere. You're literally cloning itself. So when you think of it in the kind of animal or human kingdom, it makes a lot of sense.
So, okay, I'm going to ask you something that from looking all online, I've never really been able to fully get the answer. So it's okay if you don't have the answer, but I hope you do. Torontel.
So Torontel is a common name for different grape varieties. There's a lot of confusion about names in general because, like Torontes as well, Pedro Jimenez, these are the same names as Spanish grape varieties. But the grape varieties, the Torontes grape varieties in Argentina are not genetically related to Torontes in Spain. Pedro Jimenez in Argentina is not genetically related to Pedro Jimenez in Spain. So people named their grapes after things that they would have known or their ancestors might have talked about. And so names are always quite kind of misleading. So you really have to kind of look to the genetic name. But Torontel in Chile is, in theory, Torontes Riojano from Argentina. However, there is obviously, and the same, we have Torontel in Peru as well, but you'd only really be able to know based on the individual vineyard because, a lot of people won't have genetically ever tested their grapes, and they will have had these Torontel vines in particular, they would have had for generations. So they won't necessarily know whether it is Torontes Riojano, San Juanino, or maybe it's Moscatel de Alejandría, or maybe it's a whole new Criolla grape variety. So the work that Inia and Chile have been doing, for example, they've often been going to vineyards and been trying to identify these grape varieties. So, for example, there's a producer in Maule who thought he had a Torontel vine, and they tested it and they're like, no, this is a unidentified, this is a new Criolla grape variety that has not been identified anywhere else. So now that Criolla grape variety has the name Caliborro, which is the name of the estate. So the process, we're still very much, at the kind of beginning of this process with modern genetic identification in which you can, do these tests that we can figure out, okay, what this is. And in many cases, the results that are coming back is we don't know what this is, but we know it's Criolla because we know it has this parentage, but it's an unidentified grape variety. So, you give them a new name and that becomes a different grape variety. So when I say that, we've got like 120 identified now, but I think that within 5 years we'll have 160 or 70. It's because there are so many different grapevines that have been, planted and evolving over hundreds of years. And there's never been a commercial purpose to identify them. Whereas now I think, it's a lot cheaper to identify than it ever was before. And now there's more of an impetus to identify. And so I think we will have many more of these varieties being identified. Whether they're all worthy of making good quality wines is a different question, because some of these would have been selected more for, they're all vitis vinifera, but some of them would have been selected over time because they were nice eating grapes. So a lot of the kind of Moscatel, Torontes varieties, they're very delicious to eat. So in some cases, they would have been planted in houses or, spread and kind of multiplied in houses in order to be good eating grapes rather than wine grapes. So we will see, we have to try and go back in time and understand why they've been cultivated, whether it's because they made excellent red wines, whether it's because they were really wonderful blending components for field blends, or whether it's because they were great eating grapes, or whether it's because the canopy was so big that they gave shade in their garden. There's multiple reasons that people plant grapevines. So we have to I think it's one of the great challenges that South America is facing. I hope it's a challenge that more people want to take part in. There's already, a very courageous group of winemakers, agronomists, researchers working in it. And, I know myself as a journalist, I've been writing about them from day one, and it was really hard to get articles published at the beginning. No one wanted my articles in Criolla. But now, there's a lot more interest from the media. There's a lot more interest from consumers. So I think, if we can keep this momentum going, get more people involved, then we can hopefully, see more of these vines being saved or preserved for the future. But it is a campaign that's going to need a lot of people, and there's not much money in it. So, it's only people doing it for passion, because most of these producers are very, very small. Most of these wines are quite small scale. Torontes is best known because it was an industry-wide campaign in Argentina, but there has not been an industry-wide campaign for any of the others, not even País. So, if we can get more of a big campaign behind it, then they'll definitely have a lot more chance of survival.
Okay, anyone listening, just in case you have a lot of money and really want to help,
join the Criolla train.
Yeah, but we're saying Criolla, but my question to you is, how do you think these ancestral varieties, they've actually shaped the wine culture in places like Argentina and Chile? Because there's beautiful wines like Pipeño in the south of Chile that people don't know what that is, and they're very raw and natural wines that have probably been aged in Raule Chilean wood and pressed by feet and used Zeranda, the kind of bamboo. What is it? It's a bamboo.
Yeah, the Zeranda is the bamboo destemmer.
It's like a screen. Would you call it a screen that kind of a bamboo screen?
Well, it's a destemmer technically. It's but it's a mat. So yeah, it's a mat that you roll the grapes over the top of, and the grapes go through, and the stems stay at the top.
It's cool. So there's all of that, right? So is there a lot the same things in Chile? Do you feel that is starting to come back a little bit? Some of the bigger wineries starting to use old methods?
Yeah, so these ancestral techniques that you're talking about are, well, actually the Zeranda is Chilean. Like most of the ones that you've mentioned are more Chilean than Argentinian, but
yeah, you can see, sorry, everybody, I know Chile, not Argentina.
No, just because you said, the question was, are they in Chile? And I was saying, no, they definitely are in Chile. These are ancestral winemaking techniques. And obviously the history of South America is Criolla. Before the 1850s, there were no other grape varieties. So the whole early history of winemaking in South America is based on Criolla. And in the 1850s, we see the introduction of Bordeaux varieties and some other international varieties from Europe. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Carmenere all came in that period. And from that moment on, we see some bigger changes. So we see not only a greater diversity, but you've got to imagine, it didn't change in one day. It changed in 50, 100 years. So we went from still being predominantly Criolla varieties to, eventually these kind of French or international varieties starting to take over in plantings. We still have a large percentage of Criolla in Argentina and, quite numerous plantings of País and in Chile, but those have different purposes. So in Argentina, the Criolla plantings have largely been for big, massive production, jug wine or wine-derived products. So like concentrated must, a base for making other things like, cheap vermouth style wines, anything else. So Criolla has kind of been overlooked in terms of quality grape variety. It's been very rare for it to be used in the last 50 years for quality winemaking, and has been largely for kind of jug wine, for the domestic market in Argentina, and also for the massive must industry. And then in Chile, the difference is that where the main Criolla plantings are, we've got two kind of areas. We've got the north, which is where we've got all our Muscatel, kind of Torontel, Pedro Jimenez, grown up there, which is all used for the pisco industry. And then we've got in the south, the old vines of Pais and Muscatel, which are predominantly used by small growers for their own jug wine or sold as bulk wine for the bulk wine industry. Again, being sold without kind of name. So, just kind of being mixed all together and ending up as a generic red wine or a generic white wine or a generic rosé. So it's only recently that we've got this kind of revolution happening where we've got winemakers really starting to look at making them into quality wines, either through bringing back those ancestral techniques like using the Zaranda di Stemma, or like aging in tenajas in Chile, which are the old kind of amphoras, using skin contact method, which is obviously one of the oldest methods in the world, and like really kind of bringing that back. Parallel to this, we've got some producers that have never stopped making their own wine and never stopped producing it in those styles, but they're not commercial producers. Those are like Chicha, Pepeño, the kind of roadside wines that you'll find, wines that might be sold in Dama Juana here in Argentina, Vino Patero, we would call it, which are very much kind of made, people make it in their kind of garage and will sell it on the side of a road. That has never died. And sometimes that can actually be pretty good. But I'd say 80% of the time, it's not. That every once in a while, you get a wine where you're like, a Pepeño, and you're like, that's actually really delicious. Let's fill a big jug of it.
Well, sometimes we need to gamble in life.
Yeah, definitely worth gambling because it's very safe and very cheap to gamble with those.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the kind of nutshell history of it.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, for me, and I love just shining a more broad light on South America in general, because I think, and again, everybody buy the book, The South American Wine Guide. It's beautiful. But it's amazing when you open it up as well. And everyone thinks that it's going to be, and of course, we're talking about Chile and Argentina because that's the majority of the plantings. But we haven't even touched on Uruguay. I love my friends in Uruguay, Bolivia and Peru.
And Brazil, don't forget Brazil.
Oh my God. So,
they always get forgotten as the Portuguese-speaking wine nation.
No, my God, I love their winter vines, the way that they can invert their vines to grow. I love their sparkling wines. Like, yes, I've done don't worry, I've done an episode on Brazil as well. I haven't forgotten them, but they don't speak Spanish. So it wasn't top of mind. Talk to me though for a second about Bolivia. Is it Bolivia? I remember reading your book. I think there's a beautiful picture. And the vines are growing up the trees.
Around the trees, yeah, it's Bolivia.
What grape vines are there? Is it all of them, or wasn't it one?
Those are Criolla. So what's beautiful about Bolivia is it really is, because it's so isolated, it really is in many ways kind of trapped in time. It's been very difficult. Like, it's terrible as well because Bolivia really does have economic struggles and difficulties. It's really been handicapped in its kind of economic development because it is so kind of isolated from the world. You're typically in the kind of high Andes or, even the Amazon, but it's it's in the center of South America. It doesn't have access to the sea, so it's had these challenges. The kind of beautiful thing about that is that some of the wine regions are very much as they have been for the last couple of hundred of years. And one of those regions is the Sinti Valley, which is where in particular you find these incredible old vines of Criolla that are grown in partnership or husbandry, I think you call it, with trees. So when the Jesuits originally arrived there, what they did to plant vineyards was plant trees as a tutor. So you would have a big tree, and then around that you would grow the grapevines. So instead of using poles or sticks, you'd use trees. And so they still exist and they're gorgeous. The Moscatel de Alejandría in particular is one of my favorites because it will often take off the aromas and the flavors of the trees. And the trees, the most typical tree that they use was the molle, which is a pink peppercorn. So it gives you this lovely kind of delicate spice, which actually works really nicely in the kind of floral, pretty kind of Moscatel. To have that little bit of kind of like pink pepper is yummy. But then you also have slightly more kind of herbaceous trees that can give you the kind of resin from their herbaceous leaves can give you this kind of more kind of lifted eucalypt or herbal notes in the wines. And then we have, of course, our Negra Criolla, which is the Pais. And then there's another native Criollo grape variety there that I love, which is the Vischoqueña.
Mm-hmm. I'm flicking through your book right now. Yeah. And I was like, oh, what about Viscoqueña?
Yeah. I love Viscoqueña is lovely. There's not too much of it planted, but it makes very particular wines as well. Again, with that kind of spine of tannin, nice acid in this case, and quite kind of earthy and savory with like dark fruit notes. I mean, there's a lot of lovely kind of very small production wines to discover in Bolivia. The real challenge is that getting them outside of Bolivia because they can be quite difficult to access. So yeah. And the ones that you will most likely find are actually the wines from Tarija, which is the main wine region just above Argentina. And so there you do get some lovely muscatel, but it's far more likely to find Tannat or Syrah or even Malbec nowadays grown in that region of Bolivia.
So I'm going to slowly start wrapping up this episode, and I want to just touch on, we'll see. We talked about the ancestral vines, these Criolla varieties, but also now the exciting thing I find is that, especially again, from Chile's experience, so please add in a bit more of Argentina, they're going higher in altitude. They're going all the way down south in Patagonia where it's really cold. So it's like they're really focusing on extreme winemaking. So just, you're traveling all over South America. What do you think, in your opinion, is the most extreme or the most remote vineyards that you've visited or you've heard of?
You're right. There are 3 different kind of climate influences that people are chasing for, I wouldn't say necessarily more extreme climates, but cooler climates. No one's going to the extreme of heat, no one's looking for the hotter vineyards, everyone's looking for cooler sites. So there's 3 ways of doing it: moving down in latitude, moving further south into Patagonia, in which there's some beautiful projects. Like Otronia is just one of my favorite producers probably ever in South America. There's some beautiful wines coming from the region of Osorno in Chile. There's experimental plantings even further south. So moving further south, you get a really very different acid profile and a very different fruit profile as well. So much higher acidity. And then you get, a much kind of wider spectrum of fruit as well as you typically get in cooler climates. And then you've got the altitude, the ones that are chasing altitude. I'd say that's happening a bit more in Argentina than in Chile, but because I'll come on to the third element, and Chile has that. But yeah, you get a lot of lovely vineyards kind of moving further up into the Andes. Now you have to bear into mind that it's not all about height, it's about that height, that altitude plus the latitude. So, you can go much higher in northern Argentina, in Cafayate, in Salta, in Jujuy, because you've got a lot more kind of warmth from that higher, from being closer to the equator, that actually the higher you go, the cooler it's going to get, but it still is never going to be as cool as the lower altitudes that you get here in Mendoza, for example. And you don't go to high altitude even further south because it would be too cold. You wouldn't reach ripeness. So it's not always that higher is better. It's also based on the kind of microclimate and understanding, what each kind of terroir is giving you. But that's been really exciting in terms of more focused and chiseled profiles of Chardonnay, of Malbec, of Pinot Noir as well, and Cabernet Sauvignon on the side of Chile, of course. And then the third element is the coast. And, that's largely in Chile where we've seen this huge development of people moving, planting closer and closer to the coast. And that is a phenomenon that happens all over the country, from the very north, even in the Atacama where you have very cool temperatures by the coastline through to kind of the central valleys and even some kind of more coastal plantations in Maule and Atata, which can get very cold. So those are the kind of, the 3 elements. And you've got some people here in Argentina now planting towards the coast, but it's a slightly different, it's not as cool, the Atlantic coastline, it's much more moderate than the Pacific. But we have got some new kind of coastal plantations happening in Argentina. And of course, Uruguay has been focusing on the coast for a long time. So yeah, there's definitely a changing of the map of South America. But I would say that the main wine regions remain in the kind of strongholds where it's easier to grow and, the temperatures are really suitable for viticulture. And then we've got more kind of fringe projects, which are moving to extreme altitudes or, really far south or right on the coastline. It's obviously much more expensive to cultivate there and much more challenging. And you get years where you get crazy frost and you don't produce anything. So, there's always risks and challenges, but the wines, when they can make them, can be really, really thrilling. So definitely areas to look at. For south, like I love Otronia from Argentina. And then for Chile, like the wines of Osorno, I think are really nice. So Miguel Torres has some nice wines there. Trapi del Bueno. There's Casa Silva have a lovely project down there as well.
Oh, they do a lovely Riesling, don't they? Casa Silva do a gorgeous Riesling down there.
Yeah, they do really nice Riesling. So, you know, in the south, you get like both sides. And then in Trebellin as well, there's a handful of smaller projects, but I don't think any of them make their way outside of Argentina yet. But in the south, you get lovely Rieslings. You get really nice kind of Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay. There's some nice kind of more Alsatian style blends with Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, and good for Pinot Noir, of course. And then kind of altitude. I mean, there's so many altitude producers in Argentina, but like, you know, like it's really fun to taste like the Cielo Arriba from Jujuy is a really cool wine, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as cool climate, but there's some really fun stuff happening in Jujuy. And then in Mendoza, we have some lovely wines coming from the region of La Carrera, which is kind of new and really quite extreme and difficult to cultivate in. But Matthias Riccitelli has some very nice white wines from there. And then, you know, we've got like San Pablo, which is making some very kind of chiseled, cool climate wines with Zuccardi and Salentine being the kind of main producers there. But there's a lot happening at altitude. And then on the Chile side, I've always loved Sierras de Bella Vista and Laberinto, which are kind of very lonely projects in Maule and Cachapoal, but beautiful wines, gorgeous Riesling and Pinot, and Laberinto has loads of wonderful wines as well. And then coast, I mean, again, a bunch. There's too many coastal regions in Chile to kind of mention it, but you should definitely be trying the Syrah, the really lovely coastal Syrah. Like Matatich is one of my favorite producers of proper coastal Syrah, like the gorgeous Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs of Limery, like from Tabali, you know, from Reta. And, you know, obviously Sauvignon Blanc. There's nothing better than a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc with ceviche.
You are so right. I have a very specific... I turned up to Chile one day. I was in Santiago and I can't remember what district I was in, walked into a restaurant, went, oh, this is nice. It's called El Mar, I think. Anyway, turned out it was one of the most expensive restaurants in Santiago. And I had this ceviche, a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, and it's there in my memory bank forever. So yeah, it was beautiful.
That's your welcome to Chile dish.
It absolutely is. Okay, so right, we are summing up this episode now. We have hopefully got people excited to now book a trip to South America. You have put so many beautiful photos in your book. First of all, just right now, this is such a tough question. Most beautiful vineyard place, you like, what comes to your mind when I say that?
Oh, well, I mean, I've just mentioned Laberinto and it is one of the most beautiful vineyards. So like it's in my head. So like that's, but it is gorgeous because it's one of the few vineyards. It's the only vineyard in the Andes region of Maule. And it's right on the lake on a beautiful Lago Colbon. Absolutely insane. You've got the Andes in the background, the snowy Andes in the background. And it's, you know, this steep sloped vineyard that looks out to the lake, kind of bathes in the cool mountain breeze. And the winemaker, Rafa, is incredible. And, you know, his wines are just fabulous. So yeah, that's the one that first came to mind.
Okay. If somebody is planning a trip to South America, I mean, are you going to be biased and tell them that they need to go to Mendoza? Or do you think that there is a different starting point for their journey?
I mean, you know, I absolutely adore going to Uruguay. It's one of my favorite countries to visit for the wine and the people. You know, there are so many beautiful wine regions in Chile that, you know, are really worth spending time in. But if you're only going to pick one wine region in South America, and I'd 100% tell people Mendoza, not because I'm biased and I live here, but because it's the kind of center, for me, it's the center of wine. And in South America, you've got the greatest concentration of vineyards and wineries, you know, you've got incredible wine tourism and it's beautiful. You know, you're at the foot of the Andes and you can explore the diversity of Argentine wine within one region. That's my answer for that question. Mendoza.
I will second that. I can't express to people the feeling standing in a vineyard in Mendoza and seeing the power of these humongous, the mountain range at the back, seeing this beautiful vineyard and then the powerful mountains. And of course, then the wines are beautiful. And there's so much variety to experience that you would never actually get, obviously, in UK, in the US, like you've got to be there. So, okay, yeah. And also Mendoza, the town you haven't mentioned, like, I mean, they've got some great parks and there's free yoga on certain days and there's a lot of, right? I mean, well, there was when I visited.
Yeah, the Parque San Martin, which I'm looking at out the window. The Parque San Martin is, it's enormous. It's basically the same size as the city. So it's a really beautiful place to take a nice walk. There's free classes. I haven't seen the yoga, but I've seen the free kind of like, dance exercise. They're always quite a giggle. But also one of my favorite restaurants has just opened its doors in the actual park. So now there's a new restaurant there called Habitat, which is the original restaurant of Gardenia. So they've kind of moved to their park location. So I'm going to the park not only for exercise now, but also for fab dinners and boozing.
For food. And then it's that ever-going circle where you need to do more exercise because you eat too much food. There you go. It's all in one place.
That's that. I mean, if you're a wine writer, Janina, you
well,
trust me, you have to exercise. Like, it's the only way to get through your endless, wonderful life of wine and food.
Well, from having been in that park, it's not a bad place to exercise. Okay, where can people find you? What's the best place? Should they go to Instagram so they can learn and go on this South American journey, which we...
Oh, Mendoza.
Well, okay, they can come to you in Mendoza.
In Parque San Martin, my favorite restaurant. Now, if you'd like to find me digitally, if you'd like to find me online, then I'm, Instagram. I gave up Twitter years ago. I just found it a bit nasty, and I'm definitely not in the Twitter space anymore, or the X space. But yeah, so Instagram, my name is Amanda _wine. My real name is Amanda Barnes, but my Instagram alias is in Amanda _wine, and of course South America Wine Guide.
Absolutely. I will put all that information and a link to the book. Honestly, well, I obviously have the first edition, but that has my heart because, as I said, it has some special writing from you in it.
It hasn't changed much. The second edition, the second print is just a bit lighter on the paper, because when I printed a 2-kilo book and had to start slogging it to South America, I realized that maybe I should have a lighter paper. And so the second print has more pages, but it's half a kilo lighter.
It bloody is heavy, everyone, but it does make, listen, you shouldn't buy bottles that are heavy. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but it does make you feel good. I can guarantee this is a great book. And you know what? It's heavy and it makes you feel like there's a lot of information in there. I'm very happy with it. Thank you, Amanda. Can't wait to actually touch base in real life, and we'll have a glass of, as I was drinking yesterday, a bit of Tanat. I had some Tanat last night.
Oh, lovely. I love a bit of Tanat. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good. Or Albarino if it's hot.
Exactly. Albarino. Abs from Maldonado. We will speak very soon. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Cheers, you too.
Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Now, next week, we have something a little different. For the first time ever on the podcast, I'm not chatting with a master of wine, a winemaker, or a sommelier, but a wine lover who's taken the online wine world by storm. I'm talking about Liam Darcy, aka The Wine Wally on Instagram. Now, Liam has built a following of over 104,000 wine enthusiasts in a super short space of time. And it's because he's fresh, he's relatable, and just really open. When he learns, you learn with him. And next week, we're diving into his latest wine challenge to master everything there is to know about Chenin Blanc. So I'll be putting his knowledge to the test, from key regions and styles to top producers. And trust me, by the end of the episode, you'll feel like a Chenin Blanc expert yourself. If that's not enough, I'm also going to test his knowledge on labeling terms, such as, what does Trocken mean on a label, or Reserva? But before we go, here's a little wine inspiration in a beautiful quote from Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. And he said, "Day-coloured wine, night-coloured wine. Wine with purple feet or wine with topaz blood. Wine, starry child of earth." This beautiful line comes from his Ode to Wine, where he celebrates wine as a magical living force connected to both the soil it comes from and the wonder it inspires. If you are enjoying these episodes, it would mean the world if you could like, share, subscribe, or leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, or just take a screenshot, pop it on your socials. On Instagram, tag me in. I'm at eatsleep_wine_repeat. Every little bit helps this podcast reach more wine lovers like you. So until next time, may you enjoy the beauty of life, the magic of wine, and the connection it brings. Love and light to you all. Until next Monday, wine friends. Cheers to you.